anglais, mais on a tellement l'habitude maintenant de nous exprimer sur ce sujet, la migration, et sur notre papier, sur ce document qu'on va présenter aujourd'hui en anglais, que j'ai énormément de peine à me retrouver dans les termes techniques en français. Alors je m'excuse auprès de toutes les francophones. Mais en commençant, j'aimerais quand même me remercier en bon français pour cet accueil ici cet après-midi. C'est énormément important pour nous de pouvoir nous exprimer vis-à-vis des représentants des médias. Et merci beaucoup au Club Presse de la Suisse pour cette occasion.
Merci à vous d'avoir accepté.
Avec grand plaisir. If you allow me, what I suggest that I would maybe try to say a few things about where we are in the process, why we are here today, and then give the floor to my colleague to talk a little bit about the zero draft. We were here a couple of months ago already, and since then we've actually made quite a few steps ahead in this process that will lead us to this global compact for migration. The last time we were here, I think it was in November, October. Since then, we completed this important phase of collecting data, information, best practices, exchanging on issues, exchanging with different regions. Process we concluded in December in Puerto Vallarta with what we call the stock-taking conference. And that was enormously important. That is also a reason why we are so happy to be here and talk to the representatives of the media, because one thing I think we both and many who participated in this process realized, there is so much ignorance and wrong perception about what international migration is. When we learned so many things, we learned, for instance, about the importance of migration for development, about how migration is in many cases a challenge, but in many cases also an opportunity. We learned about that so much of migration is actually interregional. Whereas if you listen out there, you could think everything is south-north. No. Much of migration happens north-north, south-south. There's north-south migration. There's, of course, south-north, but it's much more complex than we like to imagine. And that really helped us enormously over these 12 months, us, but also the participants in the process. And again, that's why I believe the role of the media is so important to also bring out this message to the readers, to the listeners, to the viewers about the multiplicity, all these different aspects of the phenomenon of international migration. So after Puerto Vallarta, this stock-taking conference, we worked very hard on what we call the zero draft. The zero draft is the raw document that we presented last week in New York on 5th February. That it will be the basis for the next phase. The next phase is the actual negotiation phase. Negotiations will take place in New York. They will go on from starting next Tuesday until July. Every month we have between 3 and 5 days for negotiations. This phase will conclude in July, and then in December in Morocco will be the ceremonial adoption of the document. We are actually quite excited so far about the reception of the document. After we presented it on 5 February, we had a lot of positive feedback in the sense that delegations and other stakeholders recognized themselves in the document. They recognized that we really were able to have the gist of the discussions, of these exchanges I just mentioned over the last 12 to 18 months reflected in the document. They call it a balanced and inclusive document, and that was for us a very, very important step ahead to give them a good basis for the negotiations that are ahead of us, which we know will be intense and will be tough, but I think we're off to a good start. And I would like to ask my colleague to give you a bit of an outline of the structure and what's in this document.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Señor Embajador, por
Gracias. Thank you very much. As Ambassador Lauer was saying, the importance of this effort is that the Global Compact should become, and clearly it's already looking like that, a very transformative instrument globally. Transformative in the sense that it is meant to change the dynamics for the better of global migration. The idea is that through this document, through this United Nations collective commitment, we should make migration safe, orderly, and regular. And when we talk about migration, we are talking about more or less 250 million people around the world that represent 3.3% of the global population. So with that in mind, and following the process Ambassador Lauber just mentioned, we presented a so-called zero draft, which I'm sure you have seen. It has been seen everywhere now, it's public, and as he was saying, it has been greeted very positively. The logic of the zero draft is the whole logic of the negotiation and the discussion we have had so far, which is the only way we can address migration is by first understanding the enormous complexity of such phenomena, and more importantly, to take it in an integral fashion, holistically. You can't, or we could not be successful if we try to address it only taking parts of it or fragmenting our understanding of the phenomenon. It has to be taken holistically from A to Z, from what are the reasons why and the fundamental causes for people to decide to move and to migrate, to the process of actual migration, transiting, moving from one place to the other, to arriving or the arrival to the place they are going to remain, why, how, what are the conditions, etc., etc. And this is the logic of the Global Compact. So what we put forward is a document whose composition is basically the following. Number one, it does have, of course, a more ritual preamble as any other UN document, but then it provides something very important, and for the media it's very important to read particularly this part, which is something we called vision and principles, where we describe it, how migration should be seen and understood, how it happens, a description of the phenomenon, plus the principles under which the whole Global Compact should be read or should be interpreted. So, of course, we include issues like sovereignty, which is very important, human rights, which is very important, rule of law, which is obviously very fundamental, and above all, the cooperative nature of all this exercise. It is not possible when you have a phenomenon like this, which is fundamentally and inherently transnational, you simply can't deal with it nationally. You need cooperation with the others, period. It is simply a factual description of the reality. So this factual description is what finally imposed itself in the UN, this cooperative need or cooperation as a means to truly address the phenomenon, and that's the Global Compact now. Then this vision and principles is followed by 22 very specific objectives that need to be met in order for migration to become safe, orderly, and regular. And each of these 22 objectives contains not only a very small description of the objective itself, but then the actual measures or actions that are needed, that are essential for that specific objective to be implemented. The logic of all these, well, first, before that, the organization of the 22 objectives, if you read them, follows the same sequence followed by the migration movement itself. So we start by, or the issues that need to, or related to the reasons why people migrate. Then we follow the movement itself, the transiting, and then the arrival. If you see the 22 objectives, you will see that they follow the same sequence. So instead of creating artificial categories to within the global compact, since we insist it's a single phenomenon that needs to be understood holistically, we put it in this sequence. And finally, something very important in this process, one of the most important objectives is that how can we ensure that the global compact is actually implemented, can be measured, and can be monitored. So in order to do that, we provide some proposals. Let me describe it like this instead of going to describe the actual mechanism we are proposing. You will read it and it's very simple. But behind these mechanisms we are proposing, our idea is to create some kind of ecosystem, political space within the United Nations for this global compact to be debated, to be discussed, to be reported on, but above all for migration to be discussed within the organization. You are aware that migration didn't have a place in the United Nations before. The only way it was discussed inside the organization was through small resolutions here and there, but always in a way from the back door of the UN, because many countries, in fact the majority of countries, were not too keen yet to actually discuss and negotiate global migration and negotiate global understandings on how to handle that. For good reasons that has changed. Now migration entered through the front door of the organization. We are collectively engaged in this very important, huge effort, and therefore the idea is, and it's totally possible, that we now create a real political space and avenues and mechanisms inside the organization to discuss this. So I will leave it there and happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Oh, I think. Okay, thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Before giving the floor to the audience, Ambassador Lauber, you said that it will be a very tough negotiation. May I ask you, and you also, Ambassador Gomez Camacho, what is for you the greatest difficulty that you are going to face in order to be able to have a final document signed in Morocco?
Thank you much. I think it's not our difficulty, but it's the difficulty of all the participants in the process. That will be to respect and maintain the integrity of the approach and this 360-degree approach the ambassador just mentioned. Of course, there is tendency for some participants to concentrate on their own priorities and concerns, and of others they will concentrate on theirs. But we need to altogether make sure that we don't lose the approach of looking at all aspects. And if we are able to maintain that, to maintain also the atmosphere in the room that allows everybody to bring forward their specific concerns and priorities, but also to listen to the others. And then I think we will succeed and have a balanced document in the end. We've said that from the beginning. We need a global approach. It's a global compact in the sense that all the member states are involved, but also all different aspects of the issue. I think that will be the key to success.
I would only add to that it's a very complex, touchy, emotional, psychological, and political issue everywhere in the world. So naturally, the politics of migration are very complex. So a big challenge would be also how to manage those politics in the room. No, is to what extent domestic politics will impact the negotiations in the UN. That's obviously very, very, very complex, but the solution is exactly what Ambassador Lauber mentioned, which is really discussing migration in all its bits and parts, completely holistically, so we all make sense of what we are discussing, and we all feel represented in what we are trying to address, meaning every country's specific challenges and problems are also addressed through the global compact.
Thank you very much. The floor is yours, ladies and gentlemen. Who would like to ask the first question? Yes, Swiss Info.
Je vais m'expliquer en français. Donc vous avez évoqué effectivement les difficultés dans nombre de pays pour des raisons intérieures. Effectivement, ben là, en Suisse, on connaît bien le sujet. Un pays qui est devenu quand même très frileux en la matière, avec simplement parce que les forces politiques et une partie notable de la population est effrayée, à tort ou à raison, par ces questions. Précisément, est-ce que cette situation de pays, l'Europe est travaillée par toutes ces questions de la migration, les militants des droits des migrants parlent depuis de nombreuses années d'une forteresse Europe. Qu'est-ce qui pourrait bien... D'abord, est-ce que effectivement, il ne faudrait pas commencer... Enfin, est-ce que l'aspect comment aider les pays, les gouvernements à faire face au sein même de leur population, de leurs citoyens, à ce rejet qui a des raisons effectivement très vastes et très complexes. Il y a cette histoire de globalisation qui pousse chaque pays à revenir sur ses identités, à faire ressurgir la question de la souveraineté nationale, etc. Est-ce que d'après vos discussions, vous avez des signes que ce mur, qui n'était pas seulement un projet de Trump au Mexique, peut être attaqué? Comment on peut faire? Est-ce que au fond, qu'est-ce qui motiverait les pays à bouger là-dessus, voilà, et comment ils pourraient faire face à leurs opinions publiques?
Merci pour cette question. Je pense qu'on ne commence pas à zéro. Il y a quand même eu en septembre 2016 cette déclaration à New York qui met en principe la base pour notre travail. C'est là où les États se sont mis d'accord de discuter du phénomène de la migration globale au sein de l'ONU pour la première fois. Ils ont accepté que c'est un défi ou un phénomène qui touche tous les pays du monde et qu'il faut travailler, qu'il faut améliorer la coopération pour faire face à ce défi, pour mieux gérer la migration. Et si vous regardez, si vous relisez la déclaration qu'on a adoptée en 2016, c'est quand même assez fort, assez surprenant ce qu'il y a dedans en tant que déclaration, en tant que commitments en bon français. Et ça, c'est la base de notre document. On ne commence pas à zéro. Ailleurs, il y a à la fois, ça je suis d'accord avec vous, et c'est l'ambassadeur qui vient de l'exprimer, il y a à la fois cette tendance dans quelques pays de mettre le focus sur des questions plutôt politiques intérieures, mais il y a en même temps la volonté de la communauté internationale, de tous les pays ensemble, de faire face à ce phénomène. Et ça, c'est la base, et c'est la dynamique qu'on sent, nous, et c'est la base pour ces travaux. Alors, il y a deux aspects, je pense. Il faut à la fois essayer à convaincre, ou pas convaincre, montrer ce que sont les faits. Et c'est ce qu'on a fait les derniers 10 à 18 mois. Montrer quels sont les défis. Il y a des défis, évidemment, point de vue sécuritaire, mais il y a aussi des défis droits de l'homme. Il y a les opportunités économiques, développement, etc., etc. Montrer vraiment la totalité des aspects. Et puis après, en même temps, ce qu'on devra faire, c'est prochainement, il faut respecter les positions de chaque pays, parce que chaque pays arrive avec ses positions, ses principes, ses soucis. Et c'est au pays. Et notre rôle en tant que facilitateur, c'est aider ces pays de se retrouver sur une base commune. On est conscient des défis, mais en même temps, je pense qu'on peut dire avec conviction qu'on est aussi optimiste par rapport à la dynamique qu'on sent dans la salle de conférence. Commençons, comme je viens de le dire, avec cette déclaration 2016, tout ce qu'on a vu et entendu ces derniers 12 mois, ce qu'on a entendu à Puerto Vallarta et ce qu'on a entendu aussi en tant que première réaction à notre draft 0.
J'ajoute quelque chose, bon, mais en anglais. Donc. One of the fundamental challenges, the political challenges of this negotiation was, and I said was because we are optimistic that is more in the past than in the present, even if we need to keep working, is the tendency to discuss this issue based on perceptions, based on fears, based on misunderstanding, based on ideology or many other reasons. So we understood since the very beginning that we couldn't start a negotiation based on that. We would have failed. And that's why we, having the mandate to negotiate, we didn't start right away. What we did instead was to pursue a very long path of learning, understanding, and promoting the creation, or the production rather, of evidence, data, figures, the real picture of migration. So as to, instead of negotiating based on perceptions, what each of us believed migration was, we could negotiate based on evidence. To what extent did we achieve that? We don't know, but we are very optimistic. We are extremely optimistic because, in fact, the zero draft already reflects that. It's based on evidence, not in perceptions. And it also comes from the discussions we had, which means that throughout a bit more than a year of very intense work globally, regionally, sub-regionally, in countries, etc., around the process of the Global Compact, the evolution of the debate is remarkable. And the evolution of each country's discourse throughout the process is very remarkable. So we feel that being as complex as it is, and the negotiation is going to be, and the domestic politics and emotions and everything is very high, we feel that the negotiation will be much more based on evidence and on the conviction that, because of evidence, that we are addressing this issue in the right way. It's complex, but we think we are in a much better position now than before.
Thank you. Another question? Yes, sir. Vous, monsieur. Approchez-vous pour prendre un micro, s'il vous plaît. Thank you. Non, pour le micro, parce qu'on enregistre, pour que les gens puissent entendre votre question. Merci. Oui, vous prenez un micro. Un micro.
Juste là, ouais, c'est ça. All right, my name is Raymond Sanner. I'm from the Center of Socioeconomic Development here in Geneva. We're an ECOSOC accredited NGO, and we've done research, we published, we've done seminars on migration. So I'm coming from a background of being involved in this topic. And my questions I have to the two ambassadors, the following. First one, what about this separation into two compacts, migration and refugees? We know from experience and evidence some move from being a refugee to a migrant, from a migrant to a refugee. How clean and clear can you make a separation? It's the first question. The second, what is the legal status of the two compacts? Is it another nice text? Is there any obligation at all for governments to follow what they sign? What are the implications, and are there any plans that some governments will pass laws to tighten up whatever it will be agreed when the compact will be signed, I think, end of this year, if I'm not mistaken. I followed also very closely another group called the Global Forum for Migration, if I'm not mistaken. It used to be called Global Forum on Migration and Development. And I thought it was very interesting to see the learning process, if I can say it that way, where the initial meetings 4 years ago were about humanitarian concerns of migration. And they're absolutely valid and will have to be taken into account in the future. But progressively, developing countries kept insisting that migration has something to do with labor market, with jobs, and we can't just make a focus only on the humanitarian focus. And that group progressively accepted that and made links between migration and labor market developments. So to what extent will the connection between humanitarian issues on migration be complemented with the evident, from my point of view, pull factor north-south, where people will migrate, take risks to their own lives in order to find a job elsewhere? Is there going to be such a bridge or not, and to what extent? Thank you.
I'm a lawyer. I love to respond to the question of the legal impact. First, the two compacts. It was decided in the New York Declaration that member states wanted two distinct compacts, one dealing with refugees and one with migrants. Now, if you look at the zero draft that we submitted last week, you will find reference to the other compact when we describe the process that led us to where we are. But also throughout the 22 objectives, you will find practical measures that make some sort of the link between the two. What we're not trying to do is to introduce new concepts. Anyway, the compact is very much really focused, and the ambassador explained it before, on practical impact. That's what we all ultimately want with this compact. We don't want new edifices of legal concepts or new institutional structures. We want practical impact on the ground that helps to make international migration safe, orderly, and regular. And that's really the purpose. That also is, I hope, the answer to the second question. It's member states also clearly signaled, and that's overwhelming, they don't want a new legally binding document. So there's not going to be a signing, there's just going to be an adoption. But the strength of the document will be the practicability and the specificity and the implementability of the document, the difference it will make on the ground when states decide which of these actions we now have in the draft under these 22 objectives they can implement. And these are very different from state to state, because every member state has a very specific, different situation with regard to international migration. So that it's not another nice document. It's a document. I hope it's a nice document, but not in a sense for like it's just a wish list. It should be at the end a very specific document helping member states individually, but also as groups among them in cooperation with each other to really make a difference on the ground. That's why we are so focused on practical. It's a bit an unusual document, and we had, of course, the privilege to draw this to start with a blank sheet, and I think we took full advantage of that privilege. It's not, with all due respect to all the documents that are out there, it's not a regular UN document, a regular UN report that leads to new sets of rules with new institutions that monitor these rules, with et cetera, et cetera. It's really much more a focused approach on practical implementation, on practical impact on the ground. And that, we believe, will make the strength of the document without being legally binding.
Thank you. Adding just to this last point quickly, as we were saying, Ambassador Lauber and myself in another meeting in New York, answering the same question, we of course can see the initial appeal for something legally binding. It sounds more powerful, It sounds, of course, binding and compulsory, and in itself sounds more powerful. But we have many precedents, in addition to the fact that simply member states do not want that. But we are full of precedents of other internationally legally binding instruments that simply are not signed or ratified by countries. Therefore, its power is very limited to only those that have done it. And the most clear example of that is the Convention on the Rights of Migrant Workers and their Families, which was signed and ratified by a relatively small number of countries, far from not only the membership of the UN itself, but above all, was signed by countries that perceive themselves or describe themselves as countries of origin, and no country that describes itself as country of destination ever signed it and probably will never do it. So the power of that instrument is absolutely limited only to a fraction of the UN. That's why this other instrument is going to be global, and we are really convinced it will be far more powerful politically and much more realistic for the ground. Now, on the question of development and the GFMD, the GFMD was created more than 10 years ago. And the evolution was that at the beginning, well, first important thing to say, so this shows how much we have changed, or the conditions have changed. That was created because there was no way we could discuss migration in the UN to begin with. So that's why countries had to go outside the UN to create something completely non-UN, distant from the UN, so we could discuss the issue. And the purpose at the time was focusing more than on the humanitarian aspect of migration, was management of migration. It was very mechanical, operational entity. And in fact, at the time, countries were sending immigration authorities to the GFMD to discuss, because it was about coordinating how we manage migration. So developing countries and countries of origin were always insisting that in addition to managing migration, the right approach was in fact the development factors, and how development is a reason to create or a driver for migration. And indeed, you are totally right. The GFMD evolved, the capacity of countries to discuss the issue evolved as well, so we started to discuss the development issues. Where is the evolution from there to now that will be reflected in the Global Compact? First, that is UN. Second, that the GFMD still was, and it is, a fragmented approach of migration. Different aspects, but not the phenomenon itself, how to address the phenomenon. This is what the Global Compact is doing. The Global Compact has fundamental, and you can see in the objectives, which is totally new, and you are right in pointing out to that, issues like employment, the quality of employment, recruitment, how people should be recruited, etc., etc. So it has the development element, but it does have development there not only as a driver for migration, meaning the lack of development, the lack of employment, the lack of housing, the lack of health, the lack of food as a reason to move, but rather the impact of that movement into development. What is the actual contribution that migrants make to development and to wealth creation globally? And the figures that we have discovered through this process are phenomenally interesting. We now know, and this goes to keep answering this question, we now know that these 250 million migrants around the world that represent only 3.2% of the global population contribute to the global GDP with 9%, 3 times in terms of percentage from what they represent as population or in the population context in terms of wealth. it means that 250 million migrants around the world are creating or producing close to 7 trillion US dollars every year. This is a net wealth creation. This is a net contribution to development. And this wealth and development creation by migrants is shared between countries of origin and, in some cases, mostly by countries of destination. We have, for example, another interesting figure, which is the one on remittances. There's always the perception that the development aspect of migration takes the form of remittances. So, and the beneficiary of this development and remittances, therefore, is the country of origin, because migrants would work somewhere else and send their income or their money back to their countries, therefore contributing to the country's development and not to the country of destination. Something that we know now is that around the world every year, migrant workers send more or less 550 billion US dollars a year. That goes in every direction. And as Ambassador Lauber mentioned before, migration is not only south-north, it's south-south, north-south, and north-north. So out of these 550 billion, more or less 20% go to wealthier countries in the north, because they are equally, they also have migrants that go somewhere else to another rich country or to another developing country, and they send money back. And the other 80% goes to southern or developing countries. But what is remarkable of this figure is that these 550 billion US dollars every year represent only 15% of their income, which means that the other 85% stays in the countries they are working in, whether developing or developed country. So this new approach, totally holistic, totally integral, seeing migration as one phenomenon, is what the Compact today is all about.
Thank you. Another question? Yes, madam.
I'm Lija Sanayu, representing also the same organization, Center for Socioeconomic Development. From my look, you could understand my interest. Of course, I'm one of the beneficiaries from the free migration movement of the world. And I was very much sort of feeling uplifted by the figures that you mentioned, and it is indeed very positive. And I noticed that also in the field of this research, only recently more work came out, because I remember a couple years ago, there's very scanty research and evidence. And a case that I found from California, and then at the end, you couldn't find it on the internet anymore. So that posed a fundamental question, which is respond to what you, Ambassador from Mexico, mentioned. The political implications and complexity and dynamics inside each country for this debate. Because ultimately, this compact needs to be some form, in some way, be recognized domestically. So my question to you is that what do you plan to do, or what do you suggest that each country need to take up the outcome of this hard work and sort of very extensive investment in order to ensure the readiness to accept a different perception, to accept a different practice. And so then we can start talking about practice and reality. Because at this moment, my worry is that with this compact, we still have a narrow gate. And the phenomenon of crashing the gate continues, but expressed in the other form, which is not included in the migration compact, but got shuffled to the other door. Thank you very much.
The answer to that is in what Ambassador Lauber already explained. The power of this instrument and its, therefore, implementability and real impact on the ground will only come from its credibility vis-à-vis member states, and that member states believe it's the right thing to do. For that to happen, we need to keep this integrality of the approach. So it's pragmatism, it's practicability. So each member state of the UN can address in a coherent way the parts of their own, or based on their own realities, their own challenges, their own legislations, their own complexities, their own regional location, etc., the problem or the issue, the challenge of migration is very political. So it really, the success of this effort is not by, or would not be in forcing solutions that are probably not wanted, or in tricking anybody. It will come only if we manage to build a genuine consensual process that all member states believe this is the way we can address migration. The fact that we are where we are already shows that we are in the right path, that countries already accepted for different reasons that this can only be addressed globally, that this can only be addressed through cooperation, that they will have to adapt many of their domestic policies on migration, and that this is the right way. And finally, there is a permanent demand of something that member states call, we always call in the UN, it's like a mantra, positive mantra, of balance, which means that since every problem has a cause effect, when we are trying to address it, we have to address them both, cause and effect. And migration is a good example of that. There are reasons for migration to happen, and there are consequences of migration. Both of them need to be addressed, not only in a fair, balanced way, but also, or above all, in a way that makes sense. So if we succeed in all that, this global compact would be transformative as we think. It'll make migration down the road safe, orderly, and regular. And adding to this, to make sure that we can monitor that, we are building these more political spaces or avenues within the organization.
Thank you. If there is... yes, a last question for you?
Oui, est-ce que dans votre approche, désolé de ne pas avoir regardé ça encore de plus près, mais parce qu'effectivement la migration est un vaste phénomène, on parle surtout évidemment de ceux qui, d'une manière ou d'une autre, fuient ou cherchent une sortie à une situation d'impasse. Mais la migration, c'est aussi, c'est aussi les expatriés, c'est aussi tout ce mouvement sur le plan économique, académique, etc., de gens qui tournent dans le monde entier. Bon, ça concerne une certaine élite, mais pas que. Chez les jeunes, on voit que du côté des étudiants, même des étudiants qui n'ont pas toutes les ressources du monde, il y en a de plus en plus qui tournent tout autour de la Terre pour aller faire des stages ici et là. Est-ce que cette réalité-là, qui est très tangible aussi, mais qui n'est pas vue comme un problème, est associée à votre démarche globale?
Tout à fait, je suis très content de votre question. C'est précisément ce qu'on essaye à faire avec ce document. Nous, c'est les États membres. Parce que la grande majorité migration, c'est de la migration régulière. Les gens, comme vous dites, les étudiants qui vont ailleurs, les gens qui vont travailler pour n'importe quelle raison qui bougent d'un pays à l'autre. Et si vous regardez le document, ça reflète vraiment cette réalité entière de la migration. Et d'un aspect, avec une approche pratique, ça essaie à adresser ça, faire même ce qui existe déjà, rendre plus productif, plus intéressant encore, et adresser les autres aussi pour vraiment faire le maximum de cette migration régulier, regularly order and safe order in regular. Désolé. Mais vous avez tout à fait raison et votre question est super pertinente pour ce qu'on essaie à faire. Nous.
Do you want to add something?
Well, just something not to be quoted.
Not to be quoted, you said?
Yes, because it's... that we were saying, or they were, that in the common lexicon, if someone was moving from a developing country to a rich country, they are called migrants. If someone from a rich country is moving to somewhere else, is called an expatriate. But in reality, they are exactly the same. They are migrants, and they are also the subject of the Global Compact. No? This is part of the terminology, by the way, that we need to improve. No?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ambassador Lauber. Merci. Muchas gracias, señor embajador. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. If we can invite you for a coffee, you are most welcome. And if you want to have one-to-one short interviews, you are also welcome. Thank you very much for your presence.